Hello friends, welcome back to my channel and welcome to all the MODA blockheads out there. That's what I'm going to call us. So today we're going to sew up MODA Blockheads 5, block number 1. This is actually block number 1. The block that's on the wall behind me was the bonus block, so they're not counting that as block number 1. That was the one that we could put the label in if we chose to, or embroidered our name or something like that. I chose to put a iron-on label from Sweetwater Label Company. A bunch of you have asked me about that, so I will link their label company down in the description box below. They're cotton labels, and then they have an adhesive on the back that you iron on and then you top stitch around, and they wash and wear beautifully. So I love those labels. So that's what I used on mine. But enough about that. Let's get sewing on this week's block. It's from Betsy Chechuan and it's called Bright Star, and the instructions, if they're not up there yet, should be up very shortly on the MODA website, and I will link to those if I can down below. Also, I saw a lot of people asking in the group about the merchandise that's available. They have these cute water bottles. This is the large size because there's only, I think, $2 more to get the large size versus the small size. So I got the large water bottle and I love it. I've been using it every day. It's a great way to remember to drink water while I'm down here in my sewing space. But they also have bags and t-shirts and sweatshirts, and I did order a sweatshirt, so I'm excited for that. Now that when they first put the merch up, I didn't order a sweatshirt because I was like, oh, it's warm, right? But now that the weather's getting cooler, I'm like, oh, maybe I should have ordered. So I went back and ordered one. Now, from experience, I'm not sure about the sweatshirt, but with the water bottle, it only took a week to get here from one time I ordered it till I got here. So it was really quick. I'm sure the sweatshirt will probably take a little bit longer. The shirts probably, I don't know for sure, but they might print those on demand. And if they do, it'll probably take a little longer, but that's okay. I'm not in a hurry. I'm excited to get one. So I will link the merchandise link down below as well. All right, so let's get started. Okay, before I start sewing, what I wanted to do really quick is go over the pattern. I did see that there was a bunch of new quilters in the MODA Blockheads group on Facebook, and I'm really excited about that. I love new quilters. Obviously, to keep this hobby going, we need new people to enter it all the time, so I think that's awesome. But it sounded like maybe many of you were a little bit confused on the instructions, the cutting sizes, and all that. So I'm doing the 12-inch size block, so there is instructions for a 6-inch and a 12-inch. So anything I talk about is going to be about the 12-inch size. Some of these blocks have a lot of pieces, and although I don't mind tiny piecing, it's not my favorite thing. So I didn't want to do the 6-inch size, but you are definitely welcome to do that if you like. And the smaller the block, the more advanced you really need to be to get your pieces straight, your seams straight, all that kind of stuff. The bigger blocks are a little bit more forgiving. So if you're brand new, you might want to think about that, whether you pick the 6-inch or the 12-inch. I feel like the 12-inch would be a little bit easier for you, but that's completely up to you, your decision. If you get a block with a lot of little pieces and they're like 1 and 1.5 inch squares, you're going to torture yourself a little bit. So just be warned. So I want to talk about up here where it says, I know you guys can't see this really well in the camera, but cutting instructions. So it says 12-inch finished block. So what they mean by a finished block is that once you sew it into the quilt, it's going to be 12 inches. So once the seam allowance is counted for and everything like that, that block will measure 12 inches. So when you put this block all together initially, it will actually measure 12.5. And that's what you're aiming for. If you're making these 12-inch blocks, before we put it into the quilt, you're going to want them to measure 12.5. If they measure 12.5 or very close, if you're off by 1/8, don't worry, you can ease that into the seam allowance. You don't have to be perfect. Then you are on the right track. So this week, it's not a difficult block, but there's a lot of half square triangles. So you're going to need to make sure that you're doing a really good job of making sure you're getting your 1/4 inch as well as close as possible, your 1/4 inch seam allowance. What I do recommend for new quilters is that you might want to draw the 1/4 inch seam allowance on the back side of your fabric before you stitch. That'll help you get a straighter line initially until you get to the point where you don't need to do that anymore. I did that when I was a beginner. I don't need to do that anymore, but definitely take that step if you need to. You'll thank yourself because things will come out how you want them. They'll come out nice and straight and all that kind of thing. So I'm going to go over the 12-inch measurements really quick. So it says 12-inch finished block, but you're going to want to cut the pieces exactly as they say. So for the A fabric, it says 4 2.5-inch squares. So you're definitely going to want 4 2.5-inch squares. So I know it says 12-inch finished right above it. And if you measure all these and put it together, it doesn't make 12. It makes 12.5. So that's where maybe some of the confusion was. But follow these to a T. So 4 2.5-inch squares for A. And then for B, C, D, and E, those all get 3-inch squares. And the reason why those are 3-inch squares is all the squares are going to end up 2.5 inches before we sew them together. But you're going to make 2 half square triangles out of the B, C, D, and E fabrics. And so we're going to do the 2 at a time method, which I'll show you that when we sew. And you're going to trim those down to 2.5. And so that's why you start with a 3-inch square. And then square F is also a 2.5-inch square because those are just solid squares that we're not going to put into the half square triangles. All right, so hopefully that helped you guys a little bit. So just think that your block, if you're doing the larger one, needs to be 12.5. And if you're doing the smaller one, it needs to be 6.5 inches. And the 6-inch and the 12-inch will come once you sew everything together into the quilt. All right, so it looks like, I'm looking ahead a little bit, and it looks like we're sewing these in quadrants, and then we're putting the quadrants together to make the block. So I'm going to teach you how to do one quadrant, and then I'll put them all together and show you my finished block. I think that will be the easiest. And it looks like from the instructions here that 2 quadrants, you're going to use some of the same fabrics from the half square triangles for 2 quadrants. So some of them you will need, a couple of the fabrics you'll need to make just for that quadrant, and some of them you'll have an extra piece. So save that extra half square triangle of the 2 colors for your second quadrant, okay? I hope that makes sense. All right, well, let's go ahead and get sewing. I'm really excited to put this one together. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay out my pieces for the 1 quadrant. Remember, we're talking in quadrants here. I'll show you the instructions again. I don't know how well you're gonna be able to see this because unfortunately the light kind of shines on it since it's a white piece of paper. But here's one of the quadrants, and we're gonna make 4 of these, as you can see, to put the block together. So I'm going to go ahead and lay out the pieces that I'm going to need for the 1 quadrant, because that's what we're going to sew together today. So this is my background. I have a tone-on-tone kind of dot with this fabric line. Well, I'm using Christmas Eve and Christmas Morning, both from Lella Boutique, and she had almost like a snow dot. So that's my background fabric. So I'm using that for my A and B fabric. My F and E fabric, which is the fabric that's going to go in the center of the block, I'm using this white with the little wreaths on it. It's really cute. And so the next thing I'm going to need is my colors. So this is a C and a D fabric, and these fabrics are one that I'm going to make 2 half square triangles. And then one of these is going to use for this quadrant, and one's going to use for another quadrant, because there's only one of these, and that's, I think, the one that goes right in the center. Okay. And then we're going to have an E and a D, and a C and an E, which will be these 2 colors. And then we're going to have a C and a B, and a D and a B. Now these 2 are going to be 2 that you're going to use 4 in this block. So 2 from here and 2 from here. So these 2 colors I'm not taking over to the other quadrant, but this one I am, and these 2 I am. So these inner 3 pieces are ones that are going to go over. And actually I put those opposite. It goes here, here, and here. Okay. So I know that's kind of crazy. I hope that makes a little bit of sense, but so these 2 pieces right here, I'm going to put aside for now. We don't need those. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw lines on the back of all these. So with the instructions might say RST. If you see something like that, that means right sides together. So the pretty side of each of your fabrics is going to lay down together. So I'm just going to do that first. And then we're going to draw a line on the back of our fabric from corner to corner. And then you're going to sew on both sides of that line, a 1/4 inch away from the line. And that's how we're going to create 2 half square triangles. So put all those together just like that. Let me grab my marking pen. I like a friction pen, but you can use whatever kind of marking tool you like. Mechanical pencil works, a chalk marker works, whatever you like, whatever your favorite marking tool is. And it doesn't much matter because we're going to be cutting that on that line, so whatever you use to mark, it's not going to be in your quilt. And the friction pen does come off with the iron, so I'm not worried about that. Okay, one more line, and then we will sew these. Now I'm going to do what's called chain piecing, and I'm going to sew all of these squares at one time. And actually I will sew one first, and then I'll sew all the rest as chain piecing, just so I can show you. So I'm going to start with this one here. Oops, got a thread right there. This doesn't want to come off. I'm going to start with this one here, and I'm going to make sure that this line that I drew is right on my 1/4 inch, and I've got a foot that the edge of my foot is the 1/4 inch. I know you guys can't see that really, but this inside edge is my 1/4 inch. So I'm going to put that foot right on my line, and I'm going to sew down that side. And then if you're not chain piecing these, which I'll show you what that is in a minute, you can flip that around without even cutting the thread and go to the other side of the line and sew down that side as well. That's one way to do it. So I've got one done. The rest of these I'm just going to chain piece. So what that means is I'm going to send them all through the machine. I'm going to do one side on all of them. Without snipping the thread, I'm going to snip them all apart, and then I'm going to do the other side. That just helps you get a lot more done quicker. But if you're a beginner and you want to do it one at a time, just to make sure that those seams are coming out correctly. And so what I was saying earlier about drawing your 1/4 inch is after you've drawn the center line, you can take the ruler and find your 1/4 inch mark on your ruler and put that mark right on the line that you drew, and then draw another line right here and sew right on that line just to get a perfect 1/4 inch. That's a great way to start if you're a beginner until you've got that 1/4 inch seam allowance down. That 1/4 inch seam allowance can be elusive. Be a tricky little thing. Okay, so this is chain piecing. So they're all like sewn together right now. But I'm going to clip them apart where I didn't stop and start my thread. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the other side. Now this is just half square triangles for one quadrant, although like I said, a couple of them carry over to another quadrant. So there's a lot of half square triangles, or HSTs, you'll see that in the directions, in this block, so you may want to chain piece them just to save yourself some time. They call me the half square triangle queen. I think Betsy is. All right, so those are all sewn. I'm going to cut those apart. And now I'm going to trim these, or not trim them, I should say, cut these two apart to make 2 squares, 2 half square triangle squares, right on the original line I drew. Now, if you're drawing the lines where you're sewing, don't cut on the sewing lines. Cut on the center line that you drew. So you should have 2 that look like that. So half square triangles. Because there's 2 triangles that make up the square. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm so excited to see so many new beginner quilters taking on this project, because as a new quilter, it's intimidating to start quilting, period, let alone take on sort of like a mystery project that you don't know what you're getting yourself into. But hopefully with the people helping in the group and with my videos, and if you get stuck and maybe somebody can help you, you'll do just fine. Lots of quilters willing to help out there, so. Okay, move the sharp things. All right, so now that these are all cut apart, we're going to, I like to finger press them because I feel like they just iron up a little bit better. So I just open them, sort of use my fingernail and press them the direction I want them to go. And then I will grab my iron and ironing board here, my table side one, and we'll iron these guys. Now, if you have a clearly perfect slotted trimmer, which a newbie probably won't have that, you can trim these first and then iron them. Or if you have a block lock ruler, those work as well. But you don't have to have any special tools to do this. You can use a regular old ruler, which is the way I'm going to show you. I have both of those rulers. But for sew-alongs like this, I like to show it using a regular ruler, just in case people out there don't have specialty rulers, because you don't need them to quilt. They're a nice thing to have, but they're not necessary. Because you want to make sure that you like this craft before you spend a whole bunch of money. All right. So I'm going to grab my handy dandy acorn. You guys know how much I love this if you've been watching me. If you haven't been watching me, this is called the Acorn Easy Press Precision Piecing Pen. It's a mouthful. I just call it magic juice because it's amazing. And it contains a concentrated starch alternative similar to Best Press, but it's its own proprietary. Oh, my iron's not hot enough. It would help if I turned my iron on. Anyway, contains a proprietary formula. It's a company out of Canada who makes this, and it just makes your blocks nice and flat. And we all know, for those of us who have been quilting for a while, and you'll find this as a newbie, the flatter your blocks, the more precise they are when they go into the quilt. So I'm just going to get a bunch of these ready while I'm waiting for my iron to get warm. You just put it right on your seam line. You can either put it directly on the threads on the back, or you can put it on the fabric on the front. It doesn't really make a difference. It doesn't leave any residue. I know that some starches do leave residue. Some don't. They've gotten better about that, but some do. This doesn't leave any residue on your fabric. It's one thing I love about it. And you just get these nice flat blocks. I mean, you can tell, I know I haven't ironed this one yet, but you can tell the difference how puffy this one is and this one's flat. So the other tool you can use to get flatter pieces is a clapper. The only issue that I have with a clapper is, one, I have one, but I never use it because it's just one of those things that I bought because I thought, oh, I need that because I saw a bunch of quilters using it. Is that if you're doing a bunch of pieces like this, you have to wait for the clapper to sort of, you put it on top of your pieces, wait for it to sort of absorb some of the heat, make your pieces flat. So you're kind of waiting a lot to use it, unless you have multiple clappers, which if you love a clapper, you might, and that works too. But this kind of replaces the clapper. For me. But that's just my personal preference. You can use whatever you want. You don't have to use any starch, any Best Press, any acorn, any clappers. You can just press, and that works too. It's just everybody's personal preference. And there's no quilt police, just to let you guys know out there. Nobody's going to judge what you do. You do your thing, or they shouldn't be judging. The one thing I love about the quilting community is, for the most part, most people are very friendly and generous. But you do what works for you. That's the most important thing. Okay, so Now that I've gotten all of these pressed, we're gonna go ahead and trim all of these guys to 2.5 inches. This is my least favorite part. I hate cutting, but we'll get it done. So let's go ahead and do that. And once they're trimmed, the fun then starts, because then you can start to sew it into the block. All right. It looks like I might need a new blade because they're not cutting, it's not cutting as well. Do you guys go through a lot of blades? I feel like I go through a lot of blades. Maybe it's just me. I know I do sew a lot. I sew every single day, so it could just be me. So I just trimmed that down to 2.5. Put it in my pile of 2.5 inch squares here. So I should have explained this before, but I'm just using a regular old ruler, and I like the Creative Grids rulers, but again, whatever ruler you like. There's lots of them on the market. There's Olfa, Quilter Select, all that thing. I just like the color of this. I can see the lines really well. I've tried the Quilter Select, and I feel like they're very comparable to these. These have grips on the bottom that don't keep them from helping from moving when you put it on fabric, and so does Quilter Select. Has the whole ruler has a grip, but I can't see those very well. I have bad, not good eyes, and the yellow, I can't see the markings. It throws something off for me. So, but it's a good ruler too. And then some of the other rulers like the Fiskars and Olfa, those are good too, but they don't have the non-slip stuff, so they would frustrate me. Although you can buy grippy things to put on the bottom of them. So if that's what you can afford, you can definitely find like the grippy stuff to put on the bottom. That will help you. So okay. So as I was saying before, you take your regular ruler, which should have a 45-degree line. You can see this black line, and we're going to put that right on the seam that we sewed. Make sure that's all up there, and we're going to trim that. You're going to find your 2.5 inch markings. I'm going to trim it that way first to get a couple of square edges. Turn it around. Put the 2.5 inch marking, which is right here, to make the 2.5 inch square. I'm going to put that on those sides that I've already trimmed that are nice and straight, making sure that my 45-degree line is still on my seam allowance, which you can see there in the video, and then cut the other side off. And that's how you can get a nice, perfect square. All right, let's keep going here. A few more to trim. I'm really excited to sew this together and see what this is going to look like. Last one, yay. I'm a very slow cutter, so I apologize for that. I'm just very OCD and need everything to be lined up just right. Okay, there we go. Close that so we don't get cut. And we will lay these out. So, in looking at the diagram for the quadrant, that's going to be my top left or my outside piece, the background fabric. That's my bottom. Then that's going to go there. And that one's going to go there. So you're going to have your same two colors touching if you used two colors for these C and D fabrics, which is what I did. Now, if you didn't use two colors, that's okay. If you decided to do more colors or less colors, that's okay too. That's just... Now that piece, which is the same as this one, is the extra, so that's going to go in another quadrant. And then that one's going to go there, putting that there. And then this piece is going to go right here. Oop, except I've got it turned the wrong way. It should make like a star point, so like I started that way and I'm like, oh, that doesn't make a star leg. So that's another way to kind of double check yourself. And so that green is going to go there to make a star leg. And these ones are the outside pieces, so that's all my background fabric. So I know if I've got background in here, something's wrong. Okay. And then that one's going to go there. And these two are also extra. So these two are going to go in the next quadrant. So we have three pieces. So this piece, and this piece that are all going to go in the next quadrant. So when you get to the next quadrant, the nice thing is you only have to make a couple pair of half square triangles. So there's a little bit less for each quadrant. Okay, so I'm going to set those aside and I'll turn this around and show you guys. But that is one quadrant, what it's going to look like. And so I'm going to go ahead and sew this together. I'm just going to sew it together like a 9-patch because that's what it looks like right now. If you're brand new to quilting, a 9-patch block is just like this, except you'll have usually for a traditional 9-patch, just squares. So you might have, you know, two colors and you'll have the colored pieces here and the whites all here, or vice versa. Or if you like a lot of colors, but that's what a traditional 9-patch is. So if you hear anybody say, oh, we're going to sew it like a 9-patch, 9 patches are just sewn in sets of 3 and then you put those rows together. So let's go ahead and do the first row. And again, with you're going to make sure you have your 1/4 inch seam allowance on these. So there's a 1/4 inch seam allowance unless otherwise stated. I know there was a lot of talk about scant 1/4 inch and all that. I did 1/4 inch on mine, not scant, just a regular 1/4 inch on my very first block that you guys saw on the wall, and it came out to the perfect size. So as long as you've got a good 1/4 inch, you don't have to worry about scant. Scant means a thread or two over from the 1/4 inch for all the new quilters out there, and maybe some seasoned quilters who, because scant is kind of a newer concept, and I really don't like that concept. I hate when I open a new quilt pattern and it says scant 1/4 inch. But here's the good news. No matter what a pattern says, as long as you're consistent throughout your entire quilt top, everything should come together right. So I always just do a regular 1/4 inch, and maybe they don't come out, maybe my blocks come out an 1/8 of an inch smaller than they're supposed to, but they all come out that way, so then they still fit together in the end like they're meant to be. Consistency with your 1/4 inch or whatever size seam allowance you're using is what's really important, no matter if it's scant, a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch. As long as you're consistent, your blocks will come out well. Okay, so I've got those 3 sewn together, and as you can see, they need to be pressed. So we're going to press, and we're going to press between each thing here. That's an important part of quilting, and you will become very good friends with your iron. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I pressed my top row and my bottom row the same direction, my seams, and my center row I'm going to press the opposite direction. Let me get that closer. So the top row and the bottom row I'm going to press to the left, and my middle row I'm going to press all these seams to the right. And that's for nesting these seams. Now, nesting the seams for new quilters is just a term that means fitting the seams together. So if this is going the opposite direction of this one, when you put these together, that little lip that this creates here, those will fit together nicely when you sew the rows together, and it'll kind of be like a puzzle where it fits in there and doesn't move, and that way your block seams, when they come together, will come out really well. So I'm going to grab those two rows and make sure they're pressed the same way. And yes, I just iron, I don't press, and I'm okay with that because I use good quality fabrics that don't stretch, and I typically best press all my fabrics before I start, and they come out just fine, so I'm not worried about that. Now this row, like I said, I'm going to press it the opposite direction, so I'm going to make sure that those are going the opposite way. And I'm sorry, this video I know is getting a little bit long. I won't make it this long every month, but I wanted to make, or every week I should say, but I want to make sure that we've got these newbies taken care of, because we were all newbies one time and we all needed help. So, okay, so now I'm going to reassemble this block. That way I don't make a mistake, which I already am. Okay, there we go. All right, take this off my iron thing. All right, so now I'm just going to sew the rows together. So I'm going to flip this one on top of here, and again, where these seams, they're going, this one's going this direction and the top one's going the other direction. So I'm going to put, nesting seams is putting these two right together, and you can feel with your fingers that they're kissing each other, for lack of a better term, without overlapping each other. And as long as they're doing that, your seam should come out nice and straight. Or match up, your seam should match up pretty well if you do that. You can pin those intersections, they're called intersections, together if you like. I avoid pinning as much as I can because I stick myself every time and it hurts like a monkey's uncle. But if you're more comfortable pinning, definitely pin at those intersections. Let's see. There we go. So as you can see, the intersections, they came out really nicely. They all hit where they're supposed to. I'm just going to finger press this way. And then we're going to add this bottom row the same way I just did the top row. And I'm just taking my time, since I don't pin, and making sure I can feel where the intersection is. And here's the thing, if you make a mistake, it's okay. That's why we have Jack the Ripper. Your seam ripper. That's what a seam ripper's for. Because nobody's perfect, we all make mistakes. Okay, and there's the bottom row. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give this guy a press because he's popping up right now. And he'll look better after he's pressed. So I'm going to go ahead and press this guy. And what I'm going to do is, he's very bulky. I can feel how bulky the seams are. So I'm going to press my seams open on this block. So usually when I press my seams open, what I do is I press them to one direction first. So I'm going to go ahead right now and do that. And then the other one. For some reason, getting your seams to press open seems to work a lot better if you, like it's more willing to press open if you press it to one side first. And then I'm going to go ahead and add my acorn right on the back here. I've already pressed it one way. This will really help me get those seams open. And I'm just going to use my fingers. It'll be hot at this point. It's a little toasty because I already ironed it. Get my fingers in here and sort of finger press it open a little bit. It's not going to stay completely, but it'll stay a little bit. Enough that I can get the iron in there. Okay. And now I'm going to iron those seams down. So if you ever hear anybody talk about pressing open, this is what they mean. If you hear about people talking about pressing to the dark side, that means they're just pressing one way or the other, typically away from background fabric towards the colors. This little seam right here is very bulky, so that's why I decided to press open. All right, so that's one quadrant right there. So I'm going to go ahead and make the other quadrants and then put this together and come show you the finished block. Well, thank you for joining me today. I wanted to show you my bright star all done. So here it is. So when I sewed the quadrants together, I made sure that the seams in between each set of two were going different directions. I didn't press those open, that wasn't necessary, nor did I press open the center seam when I joined the two. I did 1 and 2 first, put those together, 3 and 4, put those together. So it kind of made like 2 rows, and when I joined the rows, I just pressed this one way. I didn't open it. So I didn't feel like those were necessary. They weren't super bulky. It was just those blocks because there's a lot of little pieces. So if you're doing the 6-inch size, God bless you. There's lots of pieces in this one, but it turns out so pretty. And I'm really glad that I used the wreath fabric in the middle because it sort of looks like a wreath, even though it's a star, this bright star. It sort of has that wreath look. So I really like the way it turned out. Anyway, that's it for this week. I am really looking forward to next week. I love these. Stars are my favorite blocks, so I'm really excited that it was star themed. So I can't wait to see what next week's spring brings us, and I will see you then. I hope you all have a great day and a great week and have fun sewing. Bye!